trials, although I didn't play football at school, but I went to the schools trials. And we won the Soul Boys Club won the national five-a-side championship in Bradford. So that's a big thing for us to be going up north to Bradford. But even then, you didn't have scouts looking to say, come to our club. So I'd never, until that taxi driver spotted me, I'd never been, I was at QPR at the same time as Watford training, but there weren't any clubs who you know, noticed me or any of the other players. Because in that Soul Boys Club team, you had 5 or 6 players who were equally as good as me. And they were never spotted.
The tip-off was given to Bertie Mee, who eventually snapped you up. Do you remember how it happened?
I just remember Bertie getting in touch with my dad because, of course, there was a taxi driver who knew a scout. And obviously the scout knows Bertie. And Bertie then got in touch with my parents, and they say he wants to come and talk to them because as much as the taxi driver who knew the scout must have seen me the scout, I didn't know whether the scout was coming to watch me after that. I only knew this after, so I didn't know that, oh, a scout's coming to watch you. I never knew a scout was there ever. Now, the taxi driver told the scout, maybe they came to watch me 5 or 6 times, you know, playing for Sudbury Court, but I wasn't aware of that until Bertie phoned up and they said, well, we've seen you, so we want to invite you to come up to train with Watford, with Tom Wally. And that's the first I was even aware that anyone had even taken notice of me.
And there was a link between Bertie Mee and your dad from back in the day?
Well, when I set up, so Arsenal playing Jamaica, and my dad was the head of the army and all the sports in the army in Jamaica, and Arsenal played against Chelsea, funnily enough, in Kingston, and Bertie was the manager of Arsenal, and there was a bit of a scuffle, as in, you've been to Jamaica, there are lots of scuffles. So, of course, the army had to be brought in, so my dad had met Bertie, so Bertie kind of remembered my dad from that. And Bertie was fantastic. You know, he's a real old English gentleman when he comes. He speaks well, he dresses well, he's very, you know, honourable guy. And that's when, you know, I was first aware that Watford were interested with him.
Do you know what the official agreement was for you between Watford and Sudbury?
Well, I only knew after, and I only know what everyone else has supposed to read, because, of course, back then it wasn't reported, and they tell me that it was a kit, I suppose. But of course, Sudbury Court were very happy to get that kit because, you know, back then there wasn't any transfer fees going from because don't forget, Sudbury Court weren't, when you talk about a non-league team, you're talking about, you know, whatever you call it now. It used to be the conference, it's now the whatever, nation, whatever.
National League.
National League, and then you have below the National League. Sudbury Court were maybe 6, 7 divisions below that. So it's not even as if like they were, I don't even think I'd been registered. I don't even remember signing a contract for Sudbury Court or being registered for them. So there was never really going to be a fee. It's a great story after that. You know, John Barnes turned out to be great and they only got a kit. But at the time, I think Watford felt a bit hard done by having to give that kit away.
And at that time, it just so happened that your family had decided to head back to
Well, they didn't
Jamaica.
decide. He got recalled because we always knew that we were going to be here for 4 years. My dad was a military attaché. It's a diplomatic posting. It's going to be for 4 years. So my whole time in England, from I was 12 years old, I was just coming up in my 13th year, I knew I'd be going back to Jamaica at 17. And it wasn't until playing for Sudbury Court and then Watford and I was training at QPR that I even thought about being a professional footballer. I got offered a scholarship to Washington University, to Howard University in Washington, a football scholarship, which would have meant I would have gone there and done a degree in whatever, I don't know, and I would have played football. Because the thing about it is that even now it's the same, but back then, and even now you can see, football, it doesn't matter if you're a professional footballer or not, there is always football. Play football in the park, Canterbury Park, you play for a team. If you're good enough, you play in the top division, if not in the National League. If not, there are 20 divisions below where old guys like me and everybody can play. So I always knew I'd play football, be it in Jamaica, be it America. I never thought about being a professional footballer here until probably not even a year before the family were going to go back. And we knew we were going back next year. And in fact, my dad actually went back, but we were still at school. We were just finishing school. My dad went back because his job started, and we were just going to go back when the school year finished. And, you know, 6 months before is when this whole thing happened with Watford and QPR, and then Watford asked me to stay. But up until that point, I never thought about being a professional footballer. Back then, you didn't. Back then, you'd always play football without thinking about the consequence of whatever you do means that you will play at a particular level, and you'll get wherever you get to. But there's always football.
There's a clip, actually, of your father speaking about the time when he had to make the decision to leave you behind, essentially. Let's hear this.
He was just 17 at the time, and of course, you know, you worry about a boy who's only 17, being left on his own. And of course, I wasn't sure whether he would make the grade at the time. You know, I felt he had talent, but thousands of other youngsters have talent. I wasn't certain how well he would do, so I was a little bit worried. But that's what he wanted to do, and of course I always encouraged them. So it turned out well for him.
And that's the understatement, I think.
Well,
Turned out well.
They were really worried about me, to be honest with you, because, of course, when I first came to England, and this is what football does for you. Because, growing up in Jamaica, I'm from a middle-class family, lived in a, I don't know if you saw the Who Do You Think You Are? I'm a very political family. My grandfather started the JLP with Alexander Bustamante and Norman Manley and Michael Manley's father. So it's a very political family, typical middle-class Jamaican family, which... and of course, Jamaica society, very similar to this, is very divided in terms of working class, and stuff, particularly back then. But what football gives you, it gives you an in into the real inner cities. And in Jamaica, I would be playing in the inner cities. In some of the roughest areas, Trenchtown, Tivoli Gardens, these are some really bad areas in Jamaica. But because you can play football, people love you. So when I came to England, obviously we lived in Highgate, we lived in Golders Green. My sisters went to Henrietta Barnett, a nice Jewish school in Golders Green. I went to St. Marylebone Grammar School in Baker Street, which was a nice grammar school. But where I played football was in a lot of the rough areas. So that's where I would hang out. So, of course, I was always sneaking out to go out at 15, and my mum was always coming to nightclubs to try and drag me out in her dressing gowns and all kinds. So I was never naughty, but I was spirited. I was spirited. So I think they were just really worried about me, because it's like, what we're going to do? We know our sisters are very bright, they're intelligent, they're going to go to university. And, I would have gone to university and studied in America and done something. I don't know what I would have done. But what I was doing in England was just like playing football and having fun and going out. So it was like, well, what are we going to do with this boy? So, and of course, not having many pictures of me, it still leads me to wonder whether they just really, ran away and left me, to be honest with you. Because I don't think I would have left my 17-year-old son having been we didn't have any relatives. I didn't have any cousins. It's not as if we emigrated, had no cousins, no relatives here. We've only been in the country for 5 years, and there I am. They've packed up and they've gone.
So what were your initial digs like at Watford?
I lived in Oxy Avenue here, with Steve Terry, with Annie, and then I moved up to Gaddison Crescent with Annie in Garston, right, near where Nigel Callaghan used to live. And, I didn't know what being at a professional football club was. When I moved into digs with Steve Terry, he had been an apprentice with Kenny Jackett and Nigel, so he was used to this professional environment. He was used to Graham Taylor. I've moved in there. And then going to Watford first day of training, I thought this is what all professional football clubs are like. I had that discipline anyway, so it wasn't much of an issue. But I really was just looking forward to playing football. Didn't know what to expect. I was just looking forward to just being a professional footballer.
So was your initial contact with Tom Whalley, who would take in the youngsters? I mean, that before we even get to Graham Taylor, that must have been an interesting initiation being dealt with by the great Tom Whalley.
Absolutely, of course. I found it very difficult to understand him. I don't know if Tom's English wasn't particularly strong. Because, being from, of course, I live up near North Wales now, so there are lots of Tom Whalleys up there, and Tom, I can understand now why his English is the way it is. But, of course, we had Steve Harrison as well there. Harry was with the first team, so he used to make fun of Tom all the time. But Tom was fantastic for the kids. He really cared for the boys, and he was a fantastic coach. He was enthusiastic. And as much as I didn't spend a lot of time with Tom, because I had maybe a couple of youth team games the season, towards the end of the season before I'd actually signed, only 1 or 2 youth team games, Tom was still a big influence on me, because I used to hang around with a lot of the younger players. And also Tom took an interest in, although I then became a first team player, took a lot of interest in, I used to go to his house and have dinner with him, and he would, because he was really my mentor to begin with till Graham Taylor took over. And he was a tough man. Tom was a tough man, but he was fair. So, it just worked out perfectly, being at the right club at the right time. When you talk about the perfect storm of everything coming together, being at Watford, having to play in the youth team first, meeting Tom, because I was actually going to QPR on training at the same time, and it was a completely different atmosphere. I was, now you have superstar kids that everybody's after, and I remember when that rationale, that philosophy came in, because we then had, and of course, maybe Suzanne can help me, the name of the young player who then, a few years later, signed for Watford, played on the wing, and we used to have to go to his birthday party because he was this youth. Come on, what's his name? Rod Thomas, there you go. Because I remember when Rod came along, and I'm in the first team, and Tom's going, right, Rod's having his 12th birthday party. You got to come and bring presents. And then me and Steve Terry had to go to Tom's house and dress up at our party, actually, because we needed Rod Thomas to sign for us. But when I was, but when I was like 17 or at Stein, so we didn't have that kind of a thing. So it was just the fact that Tom really looked after it. So it's not as if Tom necessarily you know, was treating me better than QPR because I'm a superstar player and he wants us to the way he treated Rod. I've got over it, but it's okay. But it was just a different atmosphere where they really looked after all the young players, regardless of whether you were good or you weren't. They were interested in you, they looked after you, they cared for you. Whereas at QPR, the guy at QPR was like, I went to training, because I was training at the same time, like on a Thursday at Watford, Tuesday at QPR. And one Tuesday I went there and he just went, listen, come back in a couple of months. He was just like, oh, come back in a couple of months. There's your expenses, your bus fare. We'll see in a couple of months. And I was like, well, when? What do I do? He goes, I will ring you. But Watford were always just looking after you. So that was a real time. Because at that time, QPR were a bigger club, if you like. And I'd supported Queen's Park Rangers. When I first came in '76, they'd won the league with Stan Bowles, you know, and all those players, and Don Gibbons. But it was just the atmosphere and the feeling and the love that you felt from Watford. This really, you know, and the fact that Bertie me actually came around as well. They really cared for you.
In terms of your passage into the first team, it was short, as you've mentioned. You played, 3 reserve team games, and then you were given the opportunity off the bench against Oldham. Can you remember your first experience, the emotions of coming off the bench, being given the nod by Graham Taylor?
I remember my first, I played 1 reserve game. I played 2 youth team games before against Orient and Fulham. That was the season before, pre-season, and I scored against Orient. Then the first game of the season, we played at Vicarage Road against Swindon Town. Somebody was here. Who was here? Swindon Town reserve game. Where's he gone? Someone was here. He told me about it. And because back then, the reserves, which was fantastic, which is why reserve team football used to be very good then, used to play out of 3 o'clock on a Saturday. Football is supposed to be 3 o'clock on a Saturday. That's when you play. And when the first team played away, you played at home. If the first team played at home, you played away at 3 o'clock on a Saturday. The first team were at Newcastle. So the reserves played 3 o'clock on a Saturday at Vicarage Road. A couple hundred people there against Swindon. And I remember scoring in the first couple of minutes. Game, didn't know much about the game apart from the goal, didn't think much about the game. Luther got sent off at Newcastle, and what happened back then, no, that's a true story. I can be funny sometimes, but not. It's a serious time. I think Luther punched somebody, don't clap. So Luther got sent off. So what happened back then is when he got sent off, you just missed the next game, 1 game. So Luther then missed the next game, which is Oldham at home. So Graham Taylor puts me on the bench, which I didn't expect. And I came on for the last 12 minutes. And when I came on for the last 12 minutes, I don't think I necessarily set the world alight. I must have done something, but I don't think, you know, I came on for the last 12 minutes. Then the third game of the season now is going to be Chelsea away. And Luther's obviously going to come back in the team. So I expect to either still be on the bench or go back to the reserves. But Graham Taylor actually puts me in the team. And he leaves somebody else out. Now, I don't know who he left out, but that's show business, isn't it? You know. Am I being cruel? Probably couldn't feed his family after that, never played again, but, you know. You've got to look after yourself, haven't you? I'm only joking. I really do care about that person. Can't remember who it was. But anyway. So interestingly, he put me in the team against Chelsea. And that was the great, what Graham did was Graham really trusted the young players. And what he actually did, which is why, not just with young players, because he gave everybody complete guidance for the full 90 minutes on what he wanted you to do. And if you could follow those instructions, you'd be in the team. Regardless of how good you were, regardless of whether people thought you were good, you weren't good. So if you look at the players we actually had, as long as they did what Graham said, and I suppose he looked at me in pre-season and he said, well, if I tell him to do something, and when Graham told you to run for a brick wall, you would do it, as we all would. So, you know, he put me in the team against Chelsea, which is obviously a very scary place to go back in 1981. In fact, he was telling me I can't remember, he was in the room with me back there, and he was saying that he actually went to the Chelsea game into the shed end. And he said when Watford scored, he had to keep his mouth shut because one Watford fan jumped up and he obviously got battered. So, and I think we won 3-1.
In terms of the actual reception, though, I mean, it's more of a serious point, but some of the racist abuse that you would have been getting at Chelsea in those days.
Absolutely, but the good thing about that was, if you don't even remember the shed, but they had this huge track or this huge area behind the goal, so the shed was quite a long way away. So of course it was very intimidating with them. But listen, this was a feature of football back then, and it really wasn't an issue with me. I mean, obviously this is my 3rd game, so I didn't know what was to come, that this was going to be happening every time we played, particularly at West Ham and Millwall and places like that. But but from the good thing about Watford with Graham Taylor is he says, forget the occasion, forget the surroundings, forget whether you're playing in front of 100,000 or 100. Forget if people are cheering you or people are abusing you. You know what you've got to do. You know how you have to perform. You know you have to fit in the pattern of what we want to do. And if you let that affect you, positively or negatively, you'll fail. You'll either think, oh, how great you are because they're telling you you're great, or if they're telling you crap and they're swearing at you and abusing you, you'll go into your shell. So he said, you know, you just play the game. So it never affected me. And Luther was very similar. And Luther would have gone through it much more before me, you know, in the years before that. So, you know, any player who played at that particular time for Watford really just shut everything out.
How important was it to have someone like Luther ahead of you and almost acting as a mentor when you came in? Was there a link straight away, or because you were, you know, different ages, were you hanging around with other players, or did he put his arm around your shoulder?
Well, I know Luther's much older than me, obviously. You know, just got to look at him to know that. No, obviously, I had obviously the first time I met Luther was when I had signed, but the thing about Watford was a real family, and as much as Luther's from Jamaica, we're both black players in the team. We weren't more friendly with each other, or he didn't look after me any more than he did with Kenny Jackett or Nigel Callaghan or Steve Terry, because the family that Graham Taylor created was that we are all equal in this family. We're all responsible for each other. We all have to help each other. So while it was a natural thing for people to think, not necessarily more than Pat Rice. Or in fact, Ian Bolton, I remember we used to go around to, every Friday night we used to go around, Nigel and Steve Terry, every Friday night we used to go around to Ian Bolton's house to watch videos. He used to invite us around to watch videos, and his first wife used to, you know, make sandwiches and stuff like that. And of course, for young 18-year-old boys, this nice, attractive wife that he had, we used to look forward to that on a Friday, obviously. But every Friday, we used to go around to Ian Bolton's house. So I wouldn't say that Luther more than anybody else. Of course, because of the way we played together and, you know, the nature of our positions, whereby I'd set goals up for him and we'd play together. Even up front sometimes meant that on the field, we're probably closer. But off the field, not necessarily, no.
That moment when you would have walked into the first team dressing room for the first time, was that a daunting experience, or were you able to walk in confidently and assured, or is that impossible for someone who was only 17?
I think in other clubs it would be, but not at Watford, because of the relationship that Graham Taylor, Tom Whalley, and the club had with the Watford family, which is everybody. So therefore, you know, when I went to Liverpool, and I know at other clubs, the youth team players were really scared of the first team players because they'd like make fun of them and they'd abuse them, and you know, character building, good old days. Can't do that anymore. But never mind, different subject. But at Watford, you know, you had this respect that is really because of Tom Whalley. Because I remember, so Watford players who were brought up with Graham Taylor knew that you had to have respect for everybody. You know, the staff, the ground staff, the staff, and so everybody was like a real family. So there wasn't any trepidation at all. I mean, the one time that ever happened, which obviously was really interesting, because George Riley came, and this is obviously years later, this may be 4 years later, when George actually signed. And of course, when he got players who'd come from other clubs, there are obviously different philosophies at other clubs. And I remember George either clipping one of the young players around the ear or doing something to one of the young apprentices, and Tom Whalley actually grabbed him and got him in a headlock and nearly killed him. And in fact, George then couldn't play on the Saturday for the first team. And of course, Graham Taylor didn't say to Tom, what you doing? Because of course, you know, at Watford, we don't clip the young apprentices around the ears. So it wasn't that daunting for me to go into that situation, because, and I didn't know any different. I thought, this is what it is. This is the way the family is at every single football club. Of course, my eyes were open when I went elsewhere. But at that time, it was just a real close-knit family that everybody made you feel welcome. And it wasn't as if, you know, the older players were like, who does this kid think he is coming into the first team? And, you know, he thinks he's just, not that I did, but if they ever thought as, you know, but they wouldn't, because everybody just had everyone else's back. They wanted everyone to do well. They would help you. So it was just a very pleasant atmosphere to be in.
It was in your fifth game that you scored your first goal for the club, against Barnsley at home in a 3-1 win. Can you recall the first goal, that moment?
Not really, no. No, I can't remember when the Norwich game was, because obviously they highlighted there, but I can't remember that goal, to be honest with you. Can you remind me? No? Can you remember?
No. I wasn't there.
Yeah, but you've got it written down there.
I've got it written down.
Does it say that I beat 5 players and not make the goalkeeper or anything like that?
It was, yeah. Well, that's amazing, yeah. That's what it says here.
I would have done that.
And it was, yeah.
I can't remember what I did.
No, but that's interesting, because some people can remember exactly their first goal.
I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why.
They can picture their goals as well.
No, and I'll tell you why. Because I remember I played up front one season for Watford and scored lots of goals. I remember being the top scorer for Liverpool in the first division when I played up front. But I was never a goal scorer. Is someone who remembers his goals, who loves goals, who wants to score. I wanted to play well. I wanted to create, and if I scored, it was a bonus. So Luther will remember his goals because he's a goal scorer. So although I scored a lot of goals, you know, at different periods in time, I can't really remember a lot of my goals because it didn't matter to me who scored. It didn't matter to me whether I scored or not. I wanted to play well, be in the team. I like being a creative player. So that answers your question when people talk about. And I did play up front twice. For many years. And as I said, I was a top scorer in the first division for Liverpool one year, and it didn't matter to me whether I scored. So, as you say, a lot of people do remember their goals, but they're real goal scorers. Luther, Ross Jenkins, Ian Rush, Robbie Fowler, they remember their goals. I can't.
Yeah, Luther has said previously he can pretty much picture every goal that he scored. Yeah. So, yeah, and I'm sure he'll tell us about them in detail. Now, you went on to make 40, but for a kid then, to make 43 appearances that first season, and you scored 13 goals. You were behind Luther, who scored 19, and you were joint with Ross Jenkins. In terms of that partnership that was already in existence up top, what was it like watching those two interact with each other and for you to be tasked with supplying them with the ammunition?
Well, what we did is we practice, because practice makes permanent, young lady. Practice doesn't make perfect, it makes permanent. So because we did it, I remember coming to Watford and not knowing any different, not knowing that they don't do this at other clubs. Every single day in training, we would go through routines for hours and hours till we got it. So therefore, when I'm watching Luther and Ross make the run, it's second nature. And I knew when I got the ball, Luther's going to make his run, you've got to do this, you put the ball in. So therefore, it became second nature to us. So it wasn't looking at them and thinking, how are they doing that? How are they doing that? Because we do it every single day in training. The runs they make, the crossover runs. Graham Taylor had this thing. And why I scored goals is because of this. I didn't know that line coming from the post, which he called POMO, position of maximum opportunity. I didn't know it wasn't real. You know what I mean? Because he said there's a line that comes from, imaginary line from the post coming to the 6-yard box. If the ball goes across that and you're not there, you're in trouble. So, of course, I'm like, well, I have to be there all the time. That's why I scored a lot of goals. And because we just practice, meant that the way the team played, we could do it with our eyes closed. So it didn't surprise me. It may have surprised a lot of people looking at it and thinking, how they're playing as if they've got their eyes closed. But, you know, and the work that went into practicing all our moves, all our crossover runs. We do shadow play. And teams do shadow play, but not like we did it. We did it with, when you do shadow play, it's putting the 11 men out there and playing for 45 minutes to an hour with no opposition, but doing certain moves and doing it to its entirety, do it in the intense, as if. So I had to take a fullback on who's not there, and I'm like, there's nobody there. What do you mean go at full speed? I can just walk and go around it. You know what I mean? Because there's no one there. But with Watford in training, he did everything to its fullest, to the full speed. And it amazes me with Graham because, you know, Graham still has this, well, the rest of his soul, he's passed away, but he has this book whereby everything is written down all the time, everything within training every day. And that is why Watford were the team where we were so methodical and so organized. And now you have heart rate monitors, dietitians, statisticians, psychologists, and we had all of them back then. Because Graham was just very, very thorough. So the way we played, regardless of the method, the understanding of every player understanding his role in that team, and me understanding not just my role, but everybody else's role. So if Graham said to me, as he did every now and again, like I had to play in midfield and Mark John Walker when we played against Liverpool as a defensive midfield player, and he goes, right, go and play there. And I did it because I understood what Kenny Jackett had to do. So we all understand each other's roles. So it was just a pleasure to be involved with.
When he was in the dressing room and on the training field, how was it that everyone bought into what he said? Because if he's, you know, working you to the bone week in, week out, day in, day out, some players could have gone, no, this is too much for me. Why did everyone buy into what he said?
Well, for me, it was fair, obviously. And for the younger players, Kenny Jackett and Steve Terry and Nigel Callaghan, because we were just scared, because he would just used to shout and scream at us. And the other players, because what he did, and which is where football has changed, what Graham did, he forget about how good you are, you looked at the character. And he bought characters who he knew could do what he wanted them to do. So he looked at them from the Ian Boltons to the Les Taylors, all of these players. I mean, our greatest signing, our biggest signing was Martin Patchin for 100 and something grand, and Martin got injured in the first year, so he never really played a lot for us. But he bought players who he knew, A, could do what he wanted to do, and who would be willing to do what he wanted to do. Then when you came to that club as a new player, you then went with whatever the environment was, and the environment was one of discipline, was one of understanding, was one of respect, one of humility. So when you came to that club, you towed the line, or you left, and you didn't make it. There are lots of players coming to Watford who weren't Watford-type players later on who may not have made it. But at that particular time, you were in Graham Taylor's image. So as much as maybe myself, you know, because of course now we're coming into the top division, not from the 4th division. But all the players were in Graham Taylor's image in terms of the determination, desire, respect, humility, and he signed those players because he knew that's what they would bring. And
presumably there was also humour and light and shade with him as well. Could he be playful as well?
No. But we had Steve Harrison.
Yes.
And he was very clever, Graham, because he knew that having Steve Harrison there, and of course, you know, obviously when you get older, you do know it's a bit of a double act that he gets him to do, because Graham was very, very strong, and then Harry would be making fun behind his back and stuff like that, and Graham knows, but Graham wants him to do that to lighten the mood, so Graham would of course come down and be really, really hard, and Harry would be the one making fun and doing funny things and stuff. So it was and of course John Ward also, who was the first team coach as well. So the staff with Sam Ellis, John Ward, Steve Harrison, and Graham, it was a very, very good blend. But we definitely needed Harry, because Graham was very intense, and the work that we actually did. So really, because, you know, we would sit outside, and of course we couldn't train in tracksuit bottoms, you know, -5, sit outside, and we need, the team talks are outside, so there's snowing, you finish training, you sit down on the grass, hour and a half, and he's talking. And when he's talking, you can't even shiver. You can't even go, or to be there for another half an hour. Of course, when that's going on, Harry would be behind Graham, and he's looking at him, and Harry would be doing all kinds of funny things, and Graham would be shouting and screaming at you, and you just had to be like... So the balance of the staff was very good, which is very important.
I think we can hear a clip of Graham Taylor talking about when he first knew that you were on the radar and snapping you up, but also there's another interesting element which I want to just touch upon afterwards briefly. Let's hear the clip of Graham if we can.
A supporter, in fact, phoned up the club and said that a friend of his had seen a young boy that he thought was well worth watching. We went and watched him, we saw him, we gave him half a game, we hid him and signed him as quickly as we could. You don't need to be an expert, you see. People turn around and say, well, look at that, how did they get him? You don't need to be an expert. You see it, you get it, you don't mess about it.
Yes, tell me about this now.
Well, he has an awareness, he has a touch on the ball, he knows what he's doing, got a little bit of a break but reacts quickly, and then sees people there, just gets that little bit extra. And he'll be talking to Les Taylor about that.
There was a moment too where Willie Donaghy, who's a very experienced Scottish international player, comes out to shadow him here, and he shows him the ball and then just takes it away from him.
Yes, well, we always ask him to at least give us one of those during a game. He gets into trouble if he doesn't actually give us a sole of the foot movement, and I'm quite serious about that. Yes, we always ask him where his sole of the foot movement was in this particular game. Now that's the balance that we're trying to achieve, because there's other things as well.
The sole of the foot movement. I wanted to touch upon that. Was that, I mean, sort of half joking and then not, but was that something that one of the sort of skills that you worked on, or not really?
Not at all. And Graham was very clever. Everything he said there was tongue-in-cheek. Everything he said was tongue-in-cheek. But what he realized was that Watford had come up from the 4th division with this reputation of being a particular type of a team. Now, all of a sudden, because we'd beaten Norwich and this young boy's playing, now the focus is on Watford. And the focus, when we got into was really going to be on Watford. And he wanted to then spin it in a different way, rather than talking about, you know, we're going to come up and we're going to fight. We can do both. So he never asked for solo foot movement ever, you know. And of course, they never saw me, hid me, and signed me. But he then had to play this game of trying to elevate Watford into being a first division club, yeah, who can go with the big boys. So, you know, rather than just being very dour about the whole situation. Because when I came to Watford, regardless, I mean, when I came into Watford, no matter what I did as a 17, 18-year-old, 19-year-old, I'm now playing for England at 19, I still had to have respect and be subservient to the Pat Rices and the Ian Boltons and these bigger players who were experienced players, because you learn from the experienced players. So, and that's what Graham spoke about. So, of course, then he was obviously talking about Watford now becoming a different type of a club. But all of that was very much tongue-in-cheek. So there was no talk about what he demanded was work, hard work. That's all he demanded. Anything else was a bonus.
One of the key things, obviously, when people talk about that time and that era, and hopefully now being rediscovered at Watford, is that community spirit. When was it first sort of apparent to you that there was that link between the club and the community, which Graham Taylor was very keen to bolster?
Straight away. And you see, once again, I hadn't been on another club, so I didn't know that this is not what football is at all clubs. I thought all clubs must do this. All clubs must go around the pond and run pancake races, you know, for the fans and stuff like that. And all clubs at the end of the season has to go to a nightclub and sing and dance for the fans. Because this is what professional football is. And all clubs had to devote 14 hours a week, and it's in your contract, to community service, which means something different now, but back then. So we had to go to a lot of Benskins. You remember Benskins? We had to go to the pubs on a Thursday night in our tracksuits and push piles of pennies over for charities and go to lots of charity occasions. And you go to Liverpool and say, you can't say to a Liverpool player, go to a pub on a Thursday night. You know what I mean? But we used to do all kinds of stuff in the community, and I just thought this was normal, you know, because all the players bought into it. They'd been doing it before, and Graham said straight away that he understands that for a club like Watford, we're going to get our support from the community, nowhere else. Big clubs don't need to do that. Liverpool, Arsenal, Man United, they have supporters from not just all over the world, all over the country, but all over the world. So if Arsenal do nothing in Holloway Road and Liverpool do nothing in Liverpool, the stadium's going to be full, sponsors are going to come in, but Watford needs its community. So therefore, we have to put back into the community. So it was just became second nature that we did just so much in the community. And, you know, I remember, I mean, that thing in Bailey's, I mean, I just cannot imagine. We did I don't know if any of you were there, we did a Graham Taylor, This Is Your Life. And, you know, This Is Your Life, you hear a voice. Do you remember this voice? And then some voice from the back says, you remember? And it was Graham Taylor's This Is Your Life. And then you remember this voice. And then there am I. Couldn't do a Grimsby accent, obviously. But I had to pretend to be a pregnant woman from Grimsby. So I came out with a dress and I mean, now I could just do it. But back then I had to put a pillow underneath. And I had to say, you remember Graham after the night out in Grimsby when he was a young boy that we went around the back of the sheds, this is the result type of thing. And then Steve Harrison was being Elton John on the piano, singing and dancing. And we had to really put a sketch on and acting. And I just thought this was normal till, you know, I went to Liverpool and we just got pissed every night.
I wanted to just end this first half with a mention of Elton John, who was obviously alongside Graham in that interview. What was your sort of appreciation, I suppose, of Elton John at that stage? Because, you know, he was the rock star, and it added so much glamour, didn't it?
Well, I mean, Graham Taylor didn't want it to add glamour. You know, I'd come from Jamaica, so I mean, I'd been Bob Marley. I'd been quite impressed, but I didn't, you know. So I didn't know much about Elton when I'd come, but obviously he came and Elton's music. And I'll tell you what, there's one thing I remember about Elton, because I remember even seeing it in Jamaica, was it Tommy, the film Tommy?
Yeah, is that
yeah,
right?
Elton.
Yes.
Elton. So I remember in Jamaica seeing this flamboyant. So I didn't know it was Elton, but obviously when I'd signed but all my whole time at Watford, and for the older people here who remember that time, Elton was a bona fide, proper chairman. He wasn't the tantum and tiaras that when Graham had come. So I didn't know Elton John like that at all. You know, I just knew him as the chairman, and I knew he was Elton John. But Graham really, and back then, Graham, like all football managers back then, had the full power of the club. So Graham was much more in charge of the club than Elton. Elton would put them, but Graham would, at times, you know, Elton would come and go to the dressing room and he'd do things, and Graham was like, right now, go away now, we've had enough of you. You know, you can't, because it was football time and he was a fan, he wanted to get engaged, and Graham would say, and that's the power that Graham actually had. I mean, Elton always had this, because he loved the club and he really wanted to, but Graham's thing about that was that, yes, thank you very much for helping us out, and of course you are the chairman, you own the club, you put money in. Elton wanted to put more money into the club, and Graham said no. Because he wanted the club to stand on its own 2 feet, as it should. Because look at Man City now. If the people from Abu Dhabi leave, or Abramovich, what's going to happen to the club? So the club had to be self-sufficient, and that's what Graham insisted on. Of course, Elton used to come in, he had his superstition, and of course, being the chairman, if he has a superstition, you can't go against that. He would come into the dressing room half an hour before kickoff, when obviously we've got our jock straps on and oil all over our body. But I mean, he's the chairman and he's superstitious and it's worked, so, you know. All the best, lads. So Graham had to be saying, get out. No, but to show the effect that Graham had on Elton, the effect Graham had on Elton as a chairman, as a person. Elton got married, you remember, to Renata, and Graham's thing was, if you're going to be a chairman of a club, you can't be walking around in dresses and, you know, acting the fool. So the Elton John I knew for my 6 years at Watford was the way a chairman actually was. You know, so, you know, he was just a fantastic guy, great fan, great supporter, and as much as he was the owner and he understood that he had to allow Graham to be in charge. So in all seriousness, when Graham said, right, Elton, go, in whatever circumstance, because he wanted to be around the players even whenever, and Graham at times had to be very tough with him, and he was, and Elton understood that, because to get the respect from the players and not to undermine him, and for us to get results, Graham Taylor has to be the most important person. Elton allowed him to do that.
We will talk much more in the second half about Graham Taylor, about Elton John, about the FA Cup final, Hornet Heaven coming up in the second half as well. And we're also going to be recreating some photos from back in the day that some of you have sent in on social media. So that'll be interesting to see the transition, not only from John back in the day to you back in the day to what you look like now. So that'll be interesting as well. So that's all coming up in the second half. But I just want you all to put your hands together for that first half for John Barnes. Well done, John. Good work. We just head off. And we'll be back in a minute. Thank you.
And they asked me, can I kick it? Word. Can I kick it?